What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Backup Fantasy Sports. It is Friday, March 24th, and today we will be getting into some F1 fantasy with a 2023 Australian Grand Prix preview. I am wearing the papaya today as it is Oscar Piastri's home race, but also it came out yesterday that McLaren will be parting ways with their technical director, James Keyes, and they will be moving in a different direction for 2024. So hopefully that means that the papaya will be shooting back up the standings in the F1 world, as they've had a severely disappointing start to the 2023 season. But let's just get right into it today, starting with some Saudi Arabian Grand Prix results here. Sergio Perez was the man of the weekend. He got the pole. He came first in the race. It was an interesting Saturday in the qualifying, as Charles Leclerc was on the front row, but he had to incur his 10-spot grid penalty for taking on some more engine parts, as Ferrari has some issues to figure out this early in the season. But the main story was Max Verstappen, who had a drive shaft issue in Q2 that forced him to start 15th on the grid on Sunday, and he did his best on Sunday. I mean, he was like a hot knife through butter during that race on Sunday, where he was just slicing and dicing through the field. But Sergio Perez held on for the win. Fernando Alonso had some controversy here. He actually beat Sergio Perez to the first corner, but it was because of a incorrect starting position. So then he had to incur a 5-second penalty in the pit stop. And then after the race, it came out that they may have accidentally touched his car, and that he had to incur a 10-second penalty there, which lost him the podium, the 100th of his career. Then Aston Martin challenged it, and George Russell went from not being on the podium to holding the trophy on social media to then Fernando Alonso celebrating his 100th podium once again. But it was a better day for Mercedes, despite not getting that podium, as George Russell and Lewis Hamilton were 4th and 5th. Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, tough day for Ferrari. They were unfortunately nixed by the safety car as they both pitted a couple of laps before Lance Stroll suffered an issue and he had a DNF. So not great day for the F1 fantasy world if you went triple Red Bull, triple Aston Martin, like a lot of us have been doing to start the season, as Lance Stroll had to take a DNF and minus 20 points there. But it was a fairly entertaining race, fastest circuit on the F1 calendar. Kevin Magnussen pipped Yuki Tsunoda to the final point on the final lap, and there was quite an interesting battle going on at the back of the field between the two McLarens and Logan Sargent, who had a difficult Saturday as his Q1 time was deleted for crossing the pit lane too early, and then he kind of spun out, almost went into the wall, and did not actually set a time. So he took a -5 in qualifying for our fantasy teams there. So kind of disappointing. But we all watched that race, so it's fine. But what about the facts and stats for fantasy purposes? Well, after all the hemming and hawing that we did all weekend before qualifying started about whether to go with Leclerc, who was getting the grid penalty, it ended up being that you needed Verstappen in your team, no matter what. With his 15th place in qualifying, he ended up having a monster day. And this is the optimal team that came from the F1FantasyTools.com race tracker. So they had Red Bull and Ferrari, and then Verstappen as a DRS boost with Alonso, Tsunoda, De Vries, and Zhou Guanyu. That would have gotten you 321 points, a massive total, thanks to how Verstappen did in Sunday's race. For positions gained, Verstappen led the way there, going from 15th to 2nd with 13. Tsunoda, Charles Leclerc both picked up 5 positions gained. Overtakes, no surprise here, with Verstappen at 10, Zhou Guanyu 8, Piastri and Charles Leclerc at 7. So some positive signs for Oscar Piastri in his second Formula One race after a DNF in Bahrain. He looked a lot better. He was getting the laps in. He had to pit immediately after getting some front wing damage in the second corner with a little tussle with Pierre Gasly. And then I think in the post-race comments, he actually said that they just went on those tires for the other 49 laps of the race. So he got his laps in, just getting those reps as the rookie driver. So hopefully some hope for McLaren as Piastri enters his home race this coming weekend. Fastest pit stop was once again Ferrari. Kind of surprising. Those pit issues seem to not be a problem so far. It seems to be more of a car issue, as like we're 2 races in, but Ferrari has back-to-back fastest pit stops. Red Bull gets on the board here with 5 points, and Alpine came in with another 3 points for the French outfit. Driver fantasy points here. Hopefully this is a little bit clearer. I saw on some of the feedback from my first video that the text was too small, so I've recreated the tables by myself from F1 Fantasy Tracker and the F1 Fantasy Tools website. So using those to kind of make this own table here. So I have the driver. This is points per race, which is also total points. I've got the first 2 races and then points per million, just kind of looking at where we're at so far through 2 races. As you can see here, Fernando Alonso crushing in the points per million department with 3.7 points per million. So that's fantastic returns for the Aston Martin driver here. Verstappen still all the way up there, 96 total points on the season, 1.8 million. The only other guy kind of in that range is Zhou Guanyu at 2.1 points per million. So he's doing great. He's having a fantastic start to his second year in F1 and outperforming Valtteri Bottas by quite a bit so far. Alfa Romeo struggled in Jeddah through the first couple of days there, but Zhou Guanyu did seem to have improved performance as the weekend moved along. Pierre Gasly's also up there, not as good as Bahrain, just 6 points in Saudi Arabia this last weekend, but he seems to be settling in quite nicely to the Alpine outfit. So this is the top 10 right here. The next 10, we've got Charles Leclerc, who had 27 points in Saudi Arabia. Very good result for the Ferrari driver, but still held back by that minus 11 that he took in Bahrain with the DNF. Nick de Vries putting together some consistent performances. Logan Sargent didn't move up as much as he probably should have. That minus 5 kind of affects his Saudi Arabia score from qualifying. Could have been looking at a little bit of a better total so far this season. And then, yeah, as you can see here, Lance Stroll, 17, minus 14 this last weekend. That's tough. But Esteban Ocon and Oscar Piastri all the way down at the bottom, and Alexander Albon as well, kind of actually costing your team more than they should for the lineup. So that's the drivers right there. Moving over to the constructors, no surprise here. Red Bull absolutely dominating. I think in my Saudi Arabia Grand Prix video a couple of weeks ago, I said that Red Bull is a must because we could be looking at them getting upwards of 90 points if they had the pit stop points. It didn't totally work out that way, but they did end up, it didn't work out the way I thought it would, but they did end up getting 95 points in Saudi Arabia, which is insane. They are a must-have in your lineup right now. Ferrari came through with a big weekend. They had both cars finish. Mercedes, another very consistent. I think since the start of the 2022 season, Mercedes have only had 2 DNFs in the last 25 races now, it must be. One was a crash for George Russell, so not bad at all for Mercedes. They are about as consistent as it gets, but they just cost a little bit more than Ferrari. So if you are trying to go top heavy with your constructors, it would still be Ferrari over Mercedes to pair with Red Bull. But why would you go with either of those when you have the option of Aston Martin here, getting 5.6 points per million, averaging 37 a race? Even with a DNF, they still picked up 19 points. So pretty phenomenal returns from the men in green there. Alpine coming through here with 28 and Saudi as well, though. So it's starting to, we want to see something more like that, where it's not as cut and dry between just getting Red Bull, just getting Aston Martin. Maybe Ferrari and Mercedes can mix it up a little bit. It will cost you a lot in the driver department, but maybe it's not a bad thing to get 2 or 3 back markers and just have a top heavy lineup. Hopefully these prices start to adjust a little bit better as we move along through the season, as it has been a little underwhelming so far. But the driver of the day for me, I did this last time with Fernando Alonso, it is going to be Max Verstappen. I mean, qualified 15th, finished second, 10 positions gained, 10 overtakes, 61 fantasy points. But the crazy thing is that it was actually the first time since Russia 2021 where he failed to make Q3. So it's been a long time since he's really had to. From last year in Spa, he was 14th and he won the race, I believe, but that was due to a engine penalty. But yeah, this time he didn't even make it to the final qualification to take on those penalties if he was gonna, like in Spa. And the 34 points he now has in the Drivers' Championship is the most through 2 races in his career. So even though he is the overwhelming favorite to go back to back to back here with another Drivers' Championship in Formula One, he's still setting new career highs. And the thing that made this weekend the most interesting was that everyone beforehand was talking about Charles Leclerc, his 10-second or his 10-place grid penalty. Is that going to be an opportunity for us to use the extra DRS boost where we get 3 times as many points on a certain driver as possible? It did not work out the way a lot of people planned. I think it ended up being that Ferrari didn't look as strong in the practices, so a lot of people did go away from that. But there were people that played the 3 times DRS on a Mr. Max Verstappen here, and it worked out fantastically for them. That's why I've got better to be lucky than good as the title right here. Hat tip to anyone that played the extra DRS. A lot of people in the 2 discords that I'm in on the F1 Fantasy Reddit, we all kind of were talking and breaking it all down. It was like, it needs to be Max on a sprint weekend. Like, it makes too much sense. Like, he's going to dominate. But it turns out that if you played it on Max in Saudi Arabia, you pretty much did as well as you can do at a sprint weekend. So I've broken it down here into 2 columns. So this is what Max did in Saudi Arabia here. Didn't get any points for qualifying, but he had 18 points for finishing second, 13 positions gained, overtakes, fastest lap, driver of the day. Bang, bang, bang. 61 points in total before any DRS. So as you see there, 122 points with DRS, just the regular DRS that most of us played. And with the extra DRS, there was 183 points up for grabs with Mr. Max. So fantastic result for those people that played the extra DRS chip on Max this weekend. It was a little lucky. I don't think any of us were expecting Max Verstappen to go out in Q2 for, like I said in that last slide, the first time since Russia 2021. And the thing is, and this always happens with fantasy sports games, FPL, fantasy football, fantasy baseball, you've got these matchups that you think are just can't miss. In FPL, you've got the triple captain chip on a double game week for Mohamed Salah or Erling Haaland, and it just does not come to fruition. And sometimes it's just better to be lucky than good. And that's how we will probably end up here in the Max at a sprint weekend thing here. So this is what Max can get at a sprint weekend in the right-hand column. So he can finish on pole for qualifying, 10 points. He can finish first in the sprint, 8 points. He can get the fastest lap in the sprint, another 5 points. Then on the Sunday, he can get 25 points to finish first. He can get the fastest lap in 10 points, and he can get driver of the day, another 10 points. That total would bring him to 68 points. And with the 3 times DRS, the extra DRS boost, it would get him to 204. So that's really only a 19-point difference, which will matter at the end of the season if it all works out. I totally understand that. But it is something that we need to consider, that if Max has an engine penalty coming up, that might be a better option to play the extra DRS than just on a sprint weekend. Because the thing with playing the extra DRS on a sprint weekend is you're one DNF away from absolute disaster. Minus 20 for DNF with the extra DRS is at minus 60, and you're just in the mud if that happens. So we will have to see how this all works out. And in fantasy sports, it often does work out that the people that prepare the most and think about this, take it the most seriously, sometimes they just end up on the short end of the stick, and it does not, the best laid plans do not work out, unfortunately, for those people. So we will see as that moves forward throughout the season. But now we've got some price changes. Like I was mentioning earlier, a little bit underwhelming here in the price change department. I was on Twitter the other day, and if you want to go follow F1 Fantasy HQ, they are new to Twitter as far as I can see. I think they've reached out in the F1 Fantasy Reddit. They are doing some really nice work on their website, which is f1fantasyhq.com. I'm going to link to the article below here in the little episode description, but he pretty much broke it down as the method for increasing and decreasing prices seems overly simplistic. Every driver that scored more than 20 points and every constructor that scored more than 50 points increases in value. Meanwhile, every driver that scored less than 5 points and constructor scoring less than 15 points lost value. So that would be a little boring. I hope that changes. I hope that's just been a little like a pattern that's developed over the first two, but it's not actually how they're going to figure it out. They could be onto something here. We need to keep an eye on that, but great looking out there by F1 Fantasy HQ. They nailed it this weekend, obviously, with Fernando Alonso, Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, and Charles Leclerc all going up in price here. Fernando Alonso jumping another 0.2, which gives me hope. They're obviously realizing that Alonso is too cheap. They're trying to jump him up a little bit more, a little bit faster than the rest. But hopefully you got him in your squad as soon as possible. And now you're benefiting from those price jumps. To get the benefit of those price jumps, you will have to sell him to bank that kind of money. But for now, we will just keep getting the returns on our initial investment there. So Alonso, Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc going up there. Drivers falling, that's interesting. Lance Stroll, obviously, with the DNF. These ownership percentages are from like Monday or Tuesday when I took these screenshots, but the prices remain static, so they will not be changing as we go throughout the next couple of weeks before the Australian Grand Prix here. Lance Stroll, Valtteri Bottas, Nico Hülkenberg, Albon, Sargent, and Oscar Piastri all going down. The people that are the most interesting are Stroll going down. Maybe there's some people that can get him back to his starting cost at the season if they decide to not go with Stroll. Hülkenberg and Sargent are two interesting back markers, but for right now, I'm not sure about Albon or Piastri and Bottas. Those are just like weird price ranges. I know some people have been able to bank some of the ups in prices, and they can actually get to Albon for Australia, which could benefit them as he had a fantastic race last year. I don't remember. I think he went 57 laps before pitting on like the second to last lap. And Williams' social media had a pretty fun day with that. I believe they called him the tire whisperer, as he just went so long on those tires, but eventually did have to pit, as those are the rules. But he had a great day in Australia in 2022, so he could be an option there. The car does seem better for Williams, so I wouldn't be opposed if you can get there. I don't think I can without making some crazy moves in my first team, but certainly something to watch going forward. And in the constructors, we've got Red Bull and Ferrari going up in price here, with Alfa Romeo, Haas, and Williams all going down. Ferrari's probably the third best option. here as a constructor behind Red Bull and Aston Martin. If you want to just be slightly different, if you still believe in the Italian stallions, I'm not there yet. I'm very happy to be quite boring with the Red Bull Racing and the Aston Martin as my top two constructors, just on the value for money overall. But Ferrari sneaking in there, a couple of 10 points on the fastest pit stop each of the last two races. So they are improving in that department as we move forward. So finally, 20 minutes in, we're going to get to the Australian Grand Prix preview. Not a ton to break down as it is 1 week out right now, with 58 laps, 14 corners, 2 DRS zones. I believe when we got here last year, they had 3 DRS zones set up, and then after a couple of practices, they decided to trim it down to 2. So for safety, I don't know. But this is a very fun track to play on the F1 video game. It's quite easy to play. It is kind of known as one of the easier tracks to get around, but it is a ton of fun, and it should spell hope for McLaren. As a Papaya fan myself, I would love for them to repeat what they did last year when Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo came 5th and 6th. Not sure that's going to happen this year with all these changes and how the car looks so far in 2023, but crazier things have happened. I mean, this time last year, I don't think we would have been saying that the 2022 Australian Grand Prix could have been Daniel Ricciardo's final home race. We don't know that for a fact. He could come back, but yeah, that may have been the last time we see Ricciardo in Australia in a Formula One car. So let's keep going here. These are the results I was just talking about. So it was still another great day for Ferrari when we were all wondering if they can actually challenge Red Bull. Like, what is happening here? Like, Charles Leclerc picked up his 2nd win in 3 races. Max Verstappen DNF'd for the 2nd time in 3 races as well. And we were collectively losing our minds as F1 fans, being like, what is going on with Red Bull? Like, Max just had to pull off to the side, kicked his car. It was a whole thing. It was quite thrilling as an F1 fan to see Red Bull kind of struggling that way. And that was pretty much the lowest point of the season for Red Bull, as they kind of dominated the rest of the season from there. But yes, Charles Leclerc had a great day, great weekend there. It's the only race we have with the new cars that we've had for a couple of seasons now. So just wanted to see what was going on there. Lando Norris actually had a great qualifying as well, and then put it together on Sunday. So we'll see for McLaren. We'll see for Oscar Piastri if he can kind of come through and get his first career F1 points in front of his home fans. Moving over here to the simulations again from the F1 Fantasy Tools Discord. Fantastic resource. It's going to be linked in the episode below here. Would highly recommend joining that Discord and the F1 Fantasy Tracker Discord, as well as getting on the F1 Fantasy Reddit. Tons of smart people there, far smarter than me. I'm just blathering on a camera here, but there's a lot of people breaking it down in a very sophisticated and easy to understand way, like the F1 Fantasy Tools Discord here. They've gone and done some early simulations for the Australian Grand Prix. The driver most expected points here, Verstappen and Perez expected to just kind of dominate again, as Red Bull has been quite a absurdly good looking car through the first 2 races. I think we saw some true holy crap, that's what that car can do in Saudi Arabia, where Max was just flying through the field. There was a graph on F1.com, and if I was any good, I would have pulled that up and put it in the show, but they were showing the DRS speed and the regular speed of each of the top 4 teams. And Red Bull, the graph had to be heightened just to accommodate how fast the Red Bull car was going compared to the rest of the top 4 teams. So pretty absurd there. But the interesting thing for points per million here, most expected points per million, Fernando Alonso still comes out on top, almost a whole point or over a point ahead of Max Verstappen in the points per million race. And then in constructors here, we've got Red Bull and Ferrari as the top 2 expected points getters. And not surprisingly, we have Aston Martin as the best bang for your buck constructor. But definitely go on to the F1 Fantasy Tools Discord to get more up-to-date simulations as the free practices roll around in Melbourne next weekend. More simulations here for the best possible team. This is super handy if you are at a certain price point that doesn't really fit. So they over at the F1 Fantasy Tools Discord, again, here they've kind of got the best team with a massive cap, then 101 million cap, and the best team with just 100 million cap. So very interesting, very similar teams that a lot of us have here, but Verstappen, Perez, Stroll, Alonso, Tsunoda with 101 million cap, with Red Bull and Aston Martin. That's kind of the dream scenario for a lot of us right now, with 2 races gone in the season. And then the 104 million cap, which is just, I'm not sure if anyone's going to get there this season with how the prices are going so slowly, but they've got Gasly, Stroll, Alonso, as Gasly's pretty much the 5th driver in the meta team that most of us have. And when I say meta team, I mean, you have all three Red Bull assets and all 3 Aston Martin assets with a 5th driver. So if you have a massive cap that maybe we'll get up to this season, who knows? You could put Gasly in there, as he seems to be doing the best so far this season. Checking in on my team last week, I went from Zhou Guanyu to Logan Sargent. That was admittedly a mistake. It did not work out too well for me. I even was talking to a buddy of mine, and he was like, I don't know, like Sargent didn't do as well here. And Formula 2, went and checked his results. He was totally right. He qualified 18th, and on Friday he DNF'd in the sprint race and then finished 12th in the feature race on Sunday. Probably should have looked at that and maybe realized what was going on there, but we live and we learn. And yeah, I've got 3 options here. So I only used 1 transfer last week. Wasn't a lot I could do. I really wanted to keep that 3 Red Bull and 3 Aston Martin going. So I did, and just changed Joe to Sargent. But now I have 3 transfers available with 1.4 million in the bank, cost cap, whatever you want to call it. It's different fantasy game, but it's all the same. So here, my 3 options that I figured out so far this week. Maybe these will apply to your teams as well, especially if you have the meta team that I do here. Most of us have 3 teams, but I just focus on the first team that I have here. So option A would be going from Sargent to a better back marker. Yuki Tsunoda has been really good this year. I don't think I can get all the way up to him, though, because I don't have that much money. Maybe I can. I should have looked at that beforehand. But Zhou Guanyu has been really good. Alexander Albon's been fine. Nico Hulkenberg's been good. And I think it definitely won't be Sargent as my 5th driver next weekend. The second option I have here is Lance Stroll leaves the team to get up to Pierre Gasly, and I go from Sargent to Nico Hulkenberg, and then I roll that free transfer again to have 3 more in Azerbaijan after the April break. And option C is kind of the hit the red button, kind of blow it all up. If I go Perez to Sainz, Stroll to Gasly, and I can go all the way up from Sargent to Joe or Tsunoda. Don't see myself going with option C, that is for sure. But option A, option B, definitely in play. There's a lot that we have to see. As everyone on any of these F1 fantasy forums will tell you, like, just wait till FP3, especially with no dynamic pricing this year. Nothing's changing. All we can do is just gain more information and make better decisions as we get closer to the race. But that was it for the F1 Fantasy 2023 Australian Grand Prix preview. I'm on Twitter at Euan or you out. You can follow me there. I don't tweet as much as I thought I would, but I'm trying to get better at that. I'm on Twitter a lot, so I should probably just kind of blur out some of my thoughts a little bit more often on there. I will be in those Discords on F1 Fantasy Reddit throughout the week and the entire weekend. Watching the race. It should be a great weekend. Australia is one of the more storied tracks in F1 at this point. First Grand Prix in 1996. I think Red Bull should have a fairly easy weekend, but we'll see if Aston Martin can keep up their fast start. You can like and subscribe to the YouTube channel and the podcast below in the episode description. We'd really appreciate that. I think I had over 300 views in the first video, which was incredible. So thanks for watching if you were one of those people that did. Can't believe that it was that amount, but I really appreciate it. Hopefully this is adding something to your F1 fantasy content binge before every race. But thanks for listening on the podcast. Thanks for watching on the YouTube channel, and I will talk to you next time.